Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto, Chapter 9, verse 34. The third verse of the Chatur Sloki. I think this is the third verse. That's what I was asked to do. Om Agina Tamanandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Jina Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Rite, rthaṁ, vidyād, pratīyeta, na, pratīyeta, cātmani, tad, vidyād, ātmano, māyāṁ, yathābhāso, yathā, tamaḥ. So the remedy, the rthaṁ yat pratīyeta. Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta. Na pratīyeta cātmani. Tad vidyād ātmano māyāṁ. yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ. rthaṁ yat pratīyeta. Na pratīyeta cātmani. Tad vidyād ātmano māyāṁ. yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ. rthaṁ yat pratīyeta. Na pratīyeta cātmani. Tad vidyād ātmano māyāṁ. yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ. Okay.
Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta.
Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta. Na pratīyeta cātmani. Tad vidyād ātmano māyāṁ.
yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ.
yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ.
Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta.
Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta.
pratīyeta cātmani.
Na pratīyeta cātmani.
Tad vidyād ātmano māyāṁ.
Tad vidyād ātmano māyāṁ.
yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ.
yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ.
Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta.
Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta.
Na pratīyeta cātmani. Tad vidyād ātmano māyāṁ. yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ.
Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta.
Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta.
Na pratīyeta cātmani.
Na pratīyeta cātmani.
Tad vidyād ātmano māyāṁ. yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ.
yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ. Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta. Na pratīyeta cātmani. Tad vidyād ātmano māyāṁ. yathābhāso yathā tamaḥ. Rthaṁ yat pratīyeta. Na cātmani. Pratīyeta ātmano māyāṁ. Yathābhāso yathā.
All right, word for word. Rthaṁ, without. Artham, value. Vidyāt, that which. Pratīyeta, appears to be. Not. Pratīyeta, appears to be. Cha, and. Ātmani, in relation to me. Tat, that. Vidyāt, you must know. Ātmanaḥ, my. Māyām, illusory energy. Yathā, just as. Ābhāsaḥ, the reflection. Yathā, as. Tamaḥ, the darkness. Translation: O Brahmā, whatever appears to be of any value, if it is without relationship to me, has no reality. Know it as my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. Please repeat. O Brahmā, whatever appears to be of any value, if it is without relation to me, has no reality. Know it as my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. Purport by His Divine Grace Abhaya Charnavinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. In the previous verse, it has already been concluded that in any stage of the cosmic manifestation, its appearance, its sustenance, its growth, its interactions of different energies, its deterioration, and its disappearance, all has its basic relation with the existence of the Personality of Godhead. And as such, whenever there is forgetfulness of this prime relation with the Lord, and whenever things are accepted as real without being related to the Lord, that conception is called a product of the illusory energy of the Lord. Because nothing can exist without the Lord, it should be known that the illusory energy is also an energy of the Lord. And therein Srila Prabhupada very nicely, in those several sentences, sums up the deep meaning of this verse, which is actually, when you just read the translation, it's a little bit difficult to understand exactly what Lord Krishna is getting at. But Srila Prabhupada, in his infinite wisdom and his pure devotion and understanding, can succinctly nail within just a couple of sentences exactly what's going on here. Because nothing can exist without the Lord, it should be known that the illusory energy is also an energy of the Lord. The right conclusion of dovetailing everything in relationship with the Lord is called yoga-māyā, or the energy of union. And the wrong conception of detaching a thing from its relationship with the Lord is called the Lord's Daivi Māyā, or mahā-māyā. Both the Mayas also have connections with the Lord because nothing can exist without being related to Him. As such, the wrong conception of detaching relationships from the Lord is not false, but illusory. And I was just thinking as I was reading this, there's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and I don't know the shloka, but it talks about where Lord Krishna says that everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Bharata. Meaning that what we were just talking about right here, it doesn't matter whether it's illusory energy or it's pure energy or this energy or that energy, you're associated with it and it's all mine, and therefore, whether you know it or not, you're with me. Misconceiving one thing for another thing is called illusion. For example, accepting a rope as a snake is illusion. But the rope is not false. The rope, as it is, exists in front of the illusion person. It's not at all false, but the acceptance of it is illusory. Therefore, the wrong conception of accepting this material manifestation as being divorced from the energy of the Lord is an illusion, but it is not false. And this illusory conception is called the reflection of the reality in the darkness of ignorance. Anything that appears as apparently not being produced out of my energy is called māyā. The conception that the living entity is formless or that the Supreme Lord is formless is also illusion. Nirvisesa Sunyavadi, Srila Prabhupada just hammers and hammers and hammers and hammers the Mayavadis, the impersonalists. Being a pure devotee in deep love with the Lord, it bothers him when people try to cut apart the body of the Lord by saying, oh, he's formless. He doesn't have arms, he doesn't have legs, he's not a person, he's just an all-powerful, he's just a force, just a big energy ball. In this way, the Mayavadis, the impersonalists, try to cut the Lord into pieces. And Lord Chaitanya, in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, one day, he was with his associates, and he brought up this topic seemingly out of the blue. He was talking about something else, and suddenly he looked toward the north and said, there's a person in Varanasi, his name is Prakasananda Saraswati. He's the leader of all the impersonalists, and all he does, he's dedicated his life to cutting me to pieces. He teaches people that I have no form, I have no limbs, and in this way he just cuts me to pieces. So you can imagine if I was to say, oh, Prabhu over here, he doesn't have any legs, he doesn't have any arms, he's just a torso walking around. And I just continually repeated that to everybody I met. Oh, this person, he doesn't have any arms, he doesn't. At some point, I think he would probably get a little upset. So Lord Chaitanya does, the Supreme Lord does as well too. He doesn't like that idea. The living entities, the belligerent subordinates, us, thinking that we can just cut him into pieces. And it's a good thing to do and to teach others about it as well. So it's a great offense in that way too. So Srila Prabhupada, as in his second verse of his pranam prayers, is glorified as the stalwart devotee who continuously preaches against these philosophies in the Kali Yuga. And when he came to America long ago in the 60s, there was a big spiritual revival going on here at that time, and Lord Krishna sent him just at the right time to come and teach. But for the most part, that spiritual revival revolved around not God as a person, but God as the oneness of everything. And Srila Prabhupada was dropped right in the middle of all that, and he effectively tore it apart. And when he did so in a very, very concise and intelligent way, then so many of us just flocked to him, and we realized that he's got a better philosophy than this whole we're all one thing. There was a funny story that, because back in those days, the early days when Srila Prabhupada just came, the whole Mayavadi philosophy was very running rampant in America. Many Indian gurus from the Shankaracharya school of thought were coming to America, and they were preaching to the youth about, impersonalism and how God is not really a person, but he's just a big energy. So that whole philosophy was very, very prominent, running rampant. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, he railed and railed against it. He railed and criticized it and made fun of it and taught how it was so foolish. And one time he wanted to have a little bit of fun, and he found a little opportunity. He came to, I believe it was San Francisco airport. There's a video of this somewhere. I've seen it a few times, where he comes to San Francisco airport, and of course he's greeted by all his happy devotees. He sits down in the airport, and he's interviewed by a young lady from some newspaper. And she says to him, "So Swamiji," this is one of the things she said to him. She says, "So Swamiji, why have you come to California?" And Srila Prabhupada looked at her and smiled really big and got this grin on his face like, I'm going to mess with her just a little bit. And he says, to be one with you. and all the devotees behind him started laughing because they knew what he was thinking. But she was like, of course she didn't know what he was thinking. And she goes, oh, that's so nice. That's so sweet. And so I'll never forget that, because we are, Srila Prabhupada in his books and everywhere, he just rails and rails against them. But in the spirit of being lightweight and having a little fun, I've come here to be one with you. So I'll never forget that. It was really, really funny. Let's see, where was I? The conception that the living entity is formless, or that the Supreme Lord is formless, is also an illusion. In the Bhagavad Gita 2.12, it was said by the Lord in the midst of the battle that the warriors standing in front of Arjuna himself, and even the Lord had all existed before. They were existing on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and they would all continue to be individual personalities in the future also, even after the annihilation of the present body, and even after being liberated from the bondage of material existence. In all circumstances, the Lord and the living entities are individual personalities, and the personal features of both the Lord and the living beings are never abolished. Only the influence of the illusory energy, the reflection of light in the darkness, can, by the mercy of the Lord, be removed. In the material world, the light of the sun is also not independent, nor is that of the moon. The real source of light is the Brahma Jyoti in the spiritual world, which diffuses light from the transcendental body of the Lord. And the same light is reflected in varieties of light: the light of the sun, the light of the moon, the light of fire, or the light of electricity. So the identity of the self as being unconnected with the Supreme Self, the Lord, is an illusion. And the false claim, I am the Supreme, is the last illusory snare of the same Maya, or external energy of the Lord. When I was first dabbling in spirituality from India, the very first books I started reading were books on Buddhism, and that was because, when was this, like 1976, you go to the library, and Srila Prabhupada's books, most likely couldn't be found. So what was there in the Eastern section of thought? Books on Buddhism and stuff like that. And so initially, I had an experience when I was 16, which woke me up to the idea of we are eternal, reincarnation is very real, and because that understanding was penetrated deeply within me, I realized that I couldn't, I could no longer buy into Christianity because they didn't believe in those things, and I knew that those things were now a fact. So when I would go to the library, I would naturally gravitate towards the books from the East because I knew those philosophers from India and such taught those things. So my new realization was like, okay, I got to go hear from them because they have the truth. But in the libraries, you get the books from the impersonalists and the Buddhists, which are basically atheists, but they teach about some of the things that I wanted to hear. So initially I became a little attracted to their ideologies because in my experience and with what I could get my hands on as far as books were concerned, that was the only thing that was fitting for me at the time. So I thought that was okay. But it didn't thrill me like Srila Prabhupada's books did. Srila Prabhupada's books thrilled me. But those books, so when I read this very same kind of statement right here where Srila Prabhupada said that the last illusory snare that is thrown at the living entity is the idea that, we're all one, this impersonal philosophy, this impersonal understanding. That actually happened to me, so I could directly relate to it. When I became convinced that Srila Prabhupada had the right understanding, and as soon as I read that statement, I was like, wow, that happened to me. And that was the last illusory snare that I was tripping on until I came to the right thing. So yeah, that's exactly how it goes. I can relate to that. Here's the last paragraph of what I'm supposed to be reading here today. The Vedanta Sutra in the very beginning affirms that everything is born from the Supreme, and thus, as explained in the previous verse, all individual living entities are born from the energy of the Supreme Living Being. The Personality of Godhead, Brahmā himself was born from the energy of the Lord, and all other living entities are born from the energy of the Lord through the agency of Brahmā. None of them has any existence without being dovetailed with the Supreme Lord. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I was thinking of what kinds of things I wanted to say about this verse. It's a very deep verse, and I simply can't understand everything about it, that's for sure. Yeah, I know about illusion, I know about Maya. I was trapped in it for a very long time, and so many negative things could be said about it all. But I wanted to try to come up with some positive things. And as this morning, for some reason or another, while I was thinking about what I was going to say today, I'm not sure why, but I began thinking of the story of Kalki Dev. Oh, I know why. Because I listened to the Srimad-Bhagavatam, the translations by Amal Bhaktadas, his narration, and I've listened to it, the whole thing through a whole bunch of times. And it's really, really ecstatic to do that. And you become very used to the style of the presentation of the mood, or you could call it the flavor of how Vyasadeva writes. Every writer has their own kind of style, and you get when you read different persons' writings, you get a feeling for their style or their mood or the flavor, so to say, of how they write. So Srila Vyasadeva has a very specific flavor that is very consistent, when I was in Mayapur a few years ago, I was looking for some books, and I saw in their stalls, almost every stall where they had books, there was the Kalki Purana was sitting up there on the shelf, and I really, really like the pastime stories of the Lord. For me, the Lord's pastimes, his amazing activities, with not a whole lot of philosophy, just his pastimes, his lila, is something I very much enjoy. So I'm looking at the book Kalki Purana on the shelf, and I'm trying to decide, do I want that? And I think about it, and another day goes by, and I go to the stall again, and I'm looking through the books, and I see that one sitting there. And it was a new book that's out. I was hesitant. Why? I don't know. But for some reason or other, I finally broke down and I said, I'm going to buy that book. So I bought that book and I took it to my room, and I was just thrilled. As soon as I started reading Lord Kalki's story, the flavor, the whole mood, everything about it was, of course the book is by Srila Vyasadeva. And whoever translated it, whoever wrote it, they kept the exact same flavor, the exact same mood as the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And I had a really, really strong realization. So I'm sitting there in Mayapur in my room, reading the Kalki Purana for the very first time. I'm thrilled to be reading the pastimes of Lord Kalki, because it's something we don't get very much of in the books that we have that Srila Prabhupada's translated. In the Srimad-Bhagavatam here, Lord Kalki's mentioned just briefly. So here I have the entire book about his pastimes, and as soon as I start reading it, it's like, whoa, this is exactly the same feeling as when as the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And I had this realization, and I'll share this with everybody because if you ever get the chance to get a hold of that book or buy it, get it, the Kalki Purana. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. So my realization was this. This is the 13th canto of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And it fits because as I was reading it, okay, this is Lord Kalki's story. He's the last incarnation to come. So many of the incarnations were discussed and explained their stories at length in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, but Lord Kalki's story wasn't. So here it is in a book all its own by Srila Vyasadeva. And my personal realization was, it kind of hit me really, really hard that this is like the 13th canto of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. It just so felt that way. It should be, if it's not, it should be considered that way. So it's a very, very beautiful story, Lord Kalki. I can't say enough good things about it. It's just totally beautiful. He gets married to a beautiful young lady from the island of Sri Lanka. He goes there, he meets her, he gets married to her, and then he brings her back onto the main continent of India. And of course, so many things happen then. He lives in a beautiful palace. And then towards the end of the book, then there's the battles that are described that occur in and around India. At that time, the Kali Yuga, of course, Kali Yuga is very, very advanced, and all the surrounding nations around India are quite wild. They're very wild and out of control. And there's a lot of really, really bad kings that are controlling things in those days. And so Lord Kalki takes his army out and he begins taking them down one after another. One interesting pastime is that at one battle, after him and his men, Lord Kalki has a number of generals and very close confidant warriors who are the leaders of his armies. And they're all super powerful, as would be expected. Never defeated in battle. So one interesting pastime is that he defeated this one army, all the men, and next thing he knows, he's in his camp, and he hears from some of his people come and tell him, my lord, we have a problem. All the wives of the men that we just killed are now lined up on their horses on the battlefield, and they want to fight us. And so Kalki's like, what? So he mounts his horses with all his men, and he goes out to see what's going on. He's got his army behind him, and he sees all these ladies, and they've got weapons, and they're looking ferocious, and they want to fight. And he begins to have a talk with them. He's like, ladies, please don't do this. You don't need to do this. You're all fine ladies. You need to just, forget about all this fighting. We've had a battle with your husbands. I'm sorry we killed them, but we're not going to fight with you. We don't want to fight with you too. And their argument was like, we've got nothing left. You killed our husbands, and they meant everything to us, and so now you're going to have to take us on too. So Kalki Dev decides he's going to display some of his mystic power to these ladies. And what happens next is all the weapons in their hands leap from their hands and present themselves in front of the ladies. And then they take, each one of these weapons takes a personified form, a personal form. A sword becomes a person of this type, an axe becomes a person of this type. And all these personified forms begin to talk to these ladies, and they tell them that these weapons that you have in your hands, they were all made by Kalki Dev. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He controls everything, and He controls who we kill. He made these weapons, He gave these weapons to you, and we are completely controlled by who we will kill as well. So He's decided that this battle is not to take place, so we would like you all to just give up this idea and go home. And that's the kind of the sum and substance of what I said, but I wished I could really remember it more detail. I don't have the book. I haven't read it in a few years, and I wished I had it, because there's so many beautiful stories like that in that book. And so that's, like I said, I don't know why. I was thinking, I do know why, because I was thinking about the flavor of the Srimad-Bhagavatam and its mode of presentation, and it drew me to thinking about that book too. So I wanted to share just a little bit about that with you. Another thing that I wanted to share with you as well too today was when we talk about the illusory energy of the Lord. In the 12th canto of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, there's a really, really beautiful story. And in case you haven't got to that far yet in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, but everybody I think pretty much knows it. And that is the story of Markandeya Rishi. Markandeya Rishi was a great sage who lived for a really, really, really long time. And in the 12th canto, his story is related. Markandeya Rishi, he finally he was meditating and praying for the appearance of the Lord. And finally, one day as he was meditating, Lord's Narayan Rishi appeared before him. And Markandeya Rishi, after worshipping them and hearing them speak, he asked them to see something special. And he asked them to see the illusory potency. He asked the Lord, he asked us for something I would never be so brave as to do. Never in a million years, I would never think of this one. But he was so brave and so confident in his perfection, that he wanted to see the illusory. Please, dear Lord, show me your illusory potency, is what he asked Lord Narayan Rishi. And then they were like, okay, so be it. And so they disappeared, and he went back to his meditation and his worship. And then suddenly, as he was sitting there worshiping the Lord, everything was very peaceful. He was in a beautiful, idyllic little setting with a nice little forest with some hills and a stream nearby. And next thing you know, suddenly a powerful wind starts blowing. And then it starts raining really, 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 really hard. And the rain was so heavy that very soon all the land was covered, flooding, intense flooding. And all the hills and everything became indistinguishable as the flooding just rose and rose and rose. And next thing he knew, it was just like when we hear about Noah's Ark or something. The entire world was flooded, and he was floating in this vast, vast ocean. And then there was nothing but complete darkness. And he was completely bewildered. He was so disturbed and bewildered as he was floating through these intense, incredible storms and these high crashing waves. He would sometimes feel very, very sick, and sometimes he felt as if he was going to die. And it seemed as though he was floating in this inundation for countless millions of years, is what it felt like to him. He was watching massive, gigantic fish fight with each other right next to him, trying to devour each other, and he thought he was going to be devoured in their fights. It was very, very, very scary. And finally, after a really, really long time, what felt like forever, in the distance he saw a small, small island. And on that island he saw one small tree. And up in the leaves and the branches of that tree, he saw a baby. So in essence, baby, to make things short, he saw Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna was happily resting in the branches of this tree with his effulgence illuminating all directions and dispelling the darkness on all sides. And he was sucking his toe. And he was smiling and giggling. And he looked at Markandeya Rishi from the corners of his eyes with great love. And as Markandeya Rishi was completely taken and just completely absorbed in seeing this beautiful, enchanting scene, the next thing that happened was the baby breathed in, and Markandeya was brought in with his breathing into the body of the Lord, and suddenly found himself back in his hermitage just as things were before, like as if nothing had happened, completely peaceful and relieved that he was out of that ocean of inundation. And then in the next moment, when the Lord breathed out again, he was breathed out of the Lord's nostrils and back into the ocean of inundation. And in this way, Markandeya Rishi was experiencing the illusory energy of the Lord. So it's a very, very beautiful story. It's very, very deep. I can't understand the deep meanings of this story. You all need to read it. It's very, very beautiful. So that was one of the things that I was thinking as far as the illusory energy of the Lord, what I could explain and what I could talk about and present to all of you for some consideration. And then there is another chapter in the 12th canto. It is called, it's a very, very beautiful chapter. I love this chapter. It's one of my favorite chapters. It is, for me, it is thrilling. It completely captivates me. And it's called The Four Categories of Universal Annihilation. This chapter is heavy. And in this chapter, Sukadeva Goswami tells Maharaj Parikshit what goes down at the end of the universe. I think I've mentioned before in some of my classes that I like hearing the third canto a whole lot, because the third canto explains very, very nicely how the Lord created everything and its bits and pieces. And here in the 12th canto, Sukadeva Goswami gets back on the topic again, but he talks about end times. And so what I wanted to do is, since we've got just about enough time left, I would like to read that chapter to you all and maybe make a few comments on it as I go. It directly relates to this verse that we just read. And here is another beautiful, beautiful explanation by Sukadeva Goswami about the illusory energy of the Lord as he describes the four categories of universal annihilation. What is particularly impressive to me about these verses in this chapter, of course the whole Srimad-Bhagavat was like this, but Srila Prabhupada's, clearly Lord Krishna was guiding Srila Prabhupada's thoughts in every one of these verses of the Srimad-Bhagavat, because the beauty of some of these verses, what Srila Prabhupada has translated is just extremely stunning and extremely beautiful. So here's verse 1 of the four categories of the universal annihilation. And how many verses are there in all? There are 42 of these. So I'm going to read them off quite quickly. Please absorb yourself into this narration. Listen very, very closely. It's very nice. And the other thing about this is that it completely agrees with what science presents us. It talks about our sun going supernova, and what the effects are going to be like on this earth. All this is perfectly in line with everything we know, whether it be scientific or anything else, but it gives us a whole lot more information as well too, because this is the part where, you know, when the sun supernovas, nobody's left around. So here, the great sages, Srila Vyasadeva, in his infinite wisdom, knows what happens when no one else is around and describes what things are like. And that's what makes one of the things that makes this chapter so amazing. So here we go. Sukadeva Goswami said, "My dear king, I have already described to you the measurements of time, beginning from the smallest fraction measured by the movement of a single atom up to the total lifespan of Lord Brahmā," reflecting back to the third canto. I have also discussed the measurements of the different millennia of universal history. Now hear about the time of Brahma's day and the process of annihilation. 1,000 cycles of 4 ages constitute a single day of Brahma, known as a kalpa. In that period, O king, 14 manus come and go. So 4,300,000,000 years. It coincides directly with what science now believes is the approximate length of our universe. And 14 manos, each mano reigns for approximately 71 sets of the 4 yugas. So that 71 and times 14, that gives us the 1,000 rotations of the 4 yugas, known as a kalpa. After one day of Brahma, annihilation occurs during his night, which is of the same duration. At that time, all the 3 planetary systems are subject to destruction. This is called the naimatika, or occasional annihilation, during which the original creator, Lord Narayan, lies down upon the bed of Anantashesh and absorbs the entire universe within himself while Lord Brahmā sleeps. When the 2 halves of the lifetime of Lord Brahmā, the most elevated created being, are complete, the 7 basic elements of creation are annihilated. So 50 years and 50 years, the 2 halves of the lifetime of Lord Brahmā. O king, upon the annihilation of the material elements, the universal egg, comprising the elemental amalgamation of creation, is confronted with destruction. As annihilation approaches, O king, there will be no rain upon the earth for 100 years. Drought will lead to famine, and the starving populace will literally consume one another. The inhabitants of the earth, bewildered by the force of time, will gradually be destroyed. The sun, in its annihilating form, will drink up with its terrible rays all the water of the ocean, of living bodies, and of the earth itself. But the devastating sun will not give any rain in return. So here the sun is going supernova. It's going bigger and bigger and bigger, and the heat is getting more and more intense, gradually, slowly for 100 years. And I'm not sure if this could be 100 years of the demigods or our own 100 years. It's probably more like 100 years of the demigods, if I had to guess. Next, the great fire of annihilation will flare up. So everyone's dead. Everyone's been scorched. Everything has been scorched. There's no oceans left on the earth. It's just completely scorched because of the swelling of the sun. And then here's what happens next when nobody's left around to see it. Here's what goes on. We only have descriptions of like these from the Srimad-Bhagavat to tell us, to give us an idea of what happens, because no one is left to write about it. Next, the great fire of annihilation will flare up from the mouth of Lord Sankarshan. Carried by the mighty force of the wind, this fire will burn throughout the universe, scorching the lifeless cosmic shell. So the entire universe, with all of its planets and all of its galaxies, will be subject to this scorching, which flares up from below, from the bottom of the universe, where Lord Narayan, as Lord Anantashesh, is lying. It's hard to imagine what this would be like, but all we can do is imagine it. Burning from all sides, from above by the blazing sun, and from below by the fire of Lord Sankarshan, the universal sphere will glow like a burning ball of cow dung. A great and terrible wind of destruction will begin to blow for more than 100 years, and the sky, covered with dust, will turn gray. After that, O king, groups of multicolored clouds will gather, and roaring terribly with thunder, will pour down floods of rain for 100 years. At that time, the shell of the universe will fill up with water, forming a single cosmic ocean. As the entire universe is flooded, the water will rob the earth of its unique quality of fragrance, and the element earth, deprived of its distinguishing quality, will be dissolved. The element of fire then seizes the taste. So what we're about to hear is in the third canto, it talks about how creation starts from the subtle things going to the most gross, ending up in earth, the element earth and all of its distinguishing features. Now you're going to hear about the reverse process and how it winds up and disappears and all dissolves back into pradhan. The element fire then seizes the taste from the element water, which, deprived of its unique quality, taste, merges into fire. Air seizes the form inherent in fire, and then fire, deprived of form, merges into air. The element ether seizes the quality of air, namely touch, and that air enters into ether. Then, O king, false ego in ignorance seizes sound, the quality of ether, after which ether merges into false ego. False ego in the mode of passion takes hold of the senses, and false ego in the mode of goodness absorbs the demigods. Then the total mahā-tattva seizes false ego along with its various functions, and that mahāt is seized by the three basic modes of nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. My dear King Parikshit, these modes are further overtaken by the original unmanifest form of nature impelled by time. That unmanifest nature is not subject to the 6 kinds of transformation caused by the influence of time. Rather, it has no beginning and no end. It is the unmanifest, eternal, and infallible cause of creation. In the unmanifest stage of material nature called pradhan, there is no expression of words, no mind, and no manifestation of the elements beginning from the mahāt. Nor are there the modes of goodness, passion, or ignorance. There's no life, air, intelligence, nor any senses or the demigods. There's no definite arrangement of planetary systems, nor there are present the different stages of consciousness: sleep, wakefulness, and deep sleep. There's neither water, earth, air, fire, and sun. The situation is that like of just complete sleep or voidness. Indeed, it is indescribable. Authorities in spiritual science explain, however, that since pradhan is the original substance, it is the actual basis of material creation. This is the annihilation called prakritika, during which the energies belonging to the Supreme Person and his unmanifest material nature, disassembled by the force of time, are deprived of their potencies and merge totally together. These verses are just incredible, the way they're written and the way they give a picture in your mind of what's going on. It's just amazing. It is the absolute truth alone who manifests in the forms of intelligence, the senses and the objects of sense perception, and who is their ultimate basis. Whatever has a beginning and an end is insubstantial because of being an object perceived by limited senses and because of being non-different from its own cause. So here, Sukadeva Goswami, in a nutshell, explains why it is the material energy is illusory. Why it is illusory. A lamp, the eye that views by the light of the lamp, and the visible form that is viewed are all basically non-different from the element fire. In the same way, intelligence, the senses, and sense perceptions have no existence separate from the supreme reality, although that absolute truth remains totally distinct from them. The 3 states of intelligence are called waking consciousness, sleep, and deep sleep. But my dear King, the variegated experiences created for the pure living entity by these different states are nothing more than illusion. Just as clouds in the sky come into being and then are dispersed by the amalgamation and dissolution of their constituent elements, this is Srila Prabhupada, these words that he's used here is very like scientific and very lofty and flowery. It's a very beautiful way that he says that. This material universe is created and destroyed within the absolute truth by the amalgamation and dissolution of its elemental constituent parts. My dear King, it is stated in the Vedanta Sutra that the ingredient cause that constitutes any manifested product in this universe can be perceived as a separate reality, just as the threads that make up a cloth can be perceived separately from their product. Anything experienced in terms of general cause and specific effect must be an illusion, because such causes and effects exist only relative to each other. Indeed, whatever has a beginning and an end is unreal. Although perceived, the transformation of even a single atom of material nature has no ultimate definition without reference to the Supreme Soul. To be accepted as factually existing, something must possess the same quality as pure spirit, eternal, unchanging existence. There is no material duality in the absolute truth. The duality perceived by an ignorant person is like the difference between the sky contained in an empty pot and the sky outside the pot, or the difference between the reflection of the sun in water and the sun itself in the sky, or the difference between the vital air within one living body and that within another body. According to their different purposes, men utilize gold in various ways, and gold is therefore perceived in various forms. In the same way, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is inaccessible to material senses, is described in various terms, both ordinary and Vedic, by different types of men. This next verse, verse 32, is one of my favorites, because this verse explains how it is, why it is that here, us in the material world, why we can't see God. It's a very simple explanation. Although a cloud is a product of the sun and is also made visible by the sun, it nevertheless creates darkness for the viewing eye, which is another partial expansion of the sun. Similarly, material false ego, a particular product of the absolute truth made visible by the absolute truth, obstructs the individual soul, another partial expansion of the absolute truth, from realizing the absolute truth. So a sun is in the sky and a cloud comes and passes in front of it and you can't see the sun. In the same way, the material energy is created by the Supreme Lord, by all his activity, and because of it being covering us, we can't see the Supreme Lord. It's as simple as that. When the cloud originally produced from the sun is torn apart, the eye can see the actual form of the sun. And similarly, when the spirit soul destroys his material coverings of false ego by inquiring into the transcendental science, he regains his original spiritual awareness. My dear Parikshit, when the illusory false ego that binds the soul has been cut off with the sword of discriminating knowledge, and one has developed realization of Lord Achyuta, the Supreme Soul, this is called the Antyatika, or ultimate annihilation of material existence. And this is why there's 4 categories. This is the 4th category. So the ultimate annihilation of material existence is when we go back to the spiritual world. When we remove our Maya, and the Lord reveals himself to us and we go back to the spiritual world. That's the 4th category of universal annihilation. Experts in the subtle workings of nature, O subduer of the enemy, have declared that there are continuous processes of creation and annihilation that all created beings, beginning with Brahmā, constantly undergo. All material entities undergo transformation and are constantly and swiftly eroded by the mighty currents of time. It's a beautiful way of saying that. The various stages of existence that material things exhibit are the perpetual causes of their generation and annihilation. These stages of existence, created by beginningless and endless time, the impersonal representative of the Supreme Lord, are not visible, just as the infinitesimal momentary changes of position of the planets in the sky cannot directly be seen. In this way, the progress of time is described in terms of 4 kinds of annihilation: continuous, occasional, elemental, and final. And final, of course, being going back to Godhead. O best of the Kurus, I have related to you these narrations of the pastimes of Lord Narayan, the creator of this world and the ultimate reservoir of all existence, presenting them to you only in brief summary. Even Lord Brahmā himself would be incapable of describing them entirely. For a person who is suffering in the fire of countless material miseries and who desires to cross the insurmountable ocean of material existence, there is no suitable boat except that of cultivating devotion to the transcendental taste for the narrations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's pastimes. So, Gyan, that's why Lord Chaitanya said, don't become all caught up in Gyan, in, Sankhya philosophy, Sankhya yoga. Become caught up in the pastimes of the Lord. That is the most powerful thing that is going to relieve us from the sufferings in the material world and take us back to the spiritual world. So I'm going to read that verse one more time because this is like a super, super important, beautiful verse. For a person who is suffering in the fire of countless miseries and who desires to cross the insurmountable ocean of material existence, there is no suitable boat except that of cultivating devotion to the transcendental taste for the narrations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's pastimes. And it's easy to do. The way you do it is by listening to the pastimes of the Lord repeatedly. And that taste will automatically come up. The Lord sitting in our hearts, seeing your interest, will say, I'm going to give you a taste for that because I can see that you want it. You like hearing my pastimes. I'm going to bless you that you can read into these more deeply. You can see into them more deeply and you're going to be attracted to them. So simply by, there's no tricks to it. Simply by hearing the pastimes of the Lord, we develop more deeply an attraction for hearing the narrations of the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Long ago, this essential anthology of all the Puranas was spoken by the infallible Lord Narayan Rishi to Narada, who then repeated it to Krishna Dvaipana Vyasadeva. My dear Parikshit Maharaj, that great personality, Srila Vyasadeva, taught me this same scripture, Srimad-Bhagavat, which is equal to, oh no, I'm losing a couple, I can get it here. Lost like the last sentence, I gotta read the last sentence. Here we go. Oh, there's 2 more verses actually. My dear Maharaj Parikshit, that great personality Srila Vyasadeva taught me this same scripture, Srimad-Bhagavat, which is equal in stature to the 4 Vedas. O best of the Kurus, the same Sutta Goswami who is sitting before us will speak this Srimad-Bhagavat to the sages assembled in the great sacrifice at Naimisharanya. This he will do when questioned by the members of the assembly headed by Shanaka. So Sukadeva Goswami was clearly Tri Kala Gya. He could see the past, present, and future of everyone and everything. And here in this last verse, he's predicting, he knows, he can see it, that in the future, this Shanaka Rishi, who's sitting here in this assembly right now, is going to recite this entire thing again to the sages at Naimisharanya. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much. Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai. Does anybody have any questions? All right, good. Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Have a happy breakfast.
His Grace Bhagavad Gita Das ki jai.